robots took my podcast, man.
UFOria.
It's gonna be like Noah's Ark, and I'm gonna be Noah.
Noah's Ark? Why, hell, I have dreams like that all the time. Everybody does. Get the net, boys.
Welcome to our podcast, The Robots Took My Podcast. I am Anthony.
I am Jordan.
And Jordan, today we were going to talk about the 1985 film UFOria.
That's right.
Yeah, starring Harry Dean Stanton, Fred Ward, and Cindy Williams. But instead, Jordan, what do we have going on this episode?
Well, my dad managed to help us find the director of UFOria on this podcast, Mr. John Binder himself, who also is a writer, started as a sound man, and we will talk about his career leading up to UFOria because it does connect all of it.
It's interesting because many roads apparently lead to Mr. John Binder here. A lot of things that we're interested in over-index with him in his career, surprisingly. So go ahead, Jordan.
And yeah, I mean, UFOria is a movie, an interesting movie that you can only find on VHS right now, we should say. And it's because of many things, including music rights, obviously, which John will tell us about. But let's, first off, though, we should talk about John's early career because it does connect to UFOria. John, let's meet Mr.
Binder. Hello, Mr.
Let's meet Mr. Binder. I'm sorry. Well, yes, I'm the worst at introducing. Jesus Christ.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hello. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm flattered to be here.
Is this your first podcast, by the way, you've been on? Or have you been on other podcasts?
No, I haven't. I'm sort of obscure. I sit home and write poetry mostly now.
We got the scoop.
And my Hollywood career, listen, at 83, they're not wild about you in Hollywood. Even though I have some pretty good scripts out there. We'll see.
I believe it.
At any rate, I lead a quiet life. And I'm lucky to be here, healthy, and still going to do some things. I'm also married to a woman named Jean Field, who I met back when we had a company in New York in 1965, I think we started, and she came in to help distribute some films that we had made with Scorsese and Jim McBride and Kit Carson and various other people who made small films, or very independent film that we worked on. And so after all these years, Jeannie and I eventually over time became good friends. And after I wore out a couple of other wives, I married Jeannie some decades ago. So we're still work together and do that.
We should have her on the podcast at some point with her background even, honestly. That's pretty interesting.
Well, she has an interesting one. She produced videos for Joni Mitchell. She worked with Neil Young for a long time. She got around.
Speaking of that, how did you get started working on films? Can you tell us a little bit about what you know?
Yeah, what happened was I finished college. I had to go in the Army for a while, and when I got out, I went to New York. I studied acting at HB Studio. That was my initial ambition. I had already started. I've always written, in college I wrote poetry, and I did a lot of acting in college, serious parts. And I went to New York and I studied at the HB Studios, which was a very active studio at that time. And many, many people have gone there over the years. And then I had a friend from Kenya named Jim McBride who became a filmmaker also and worked with us.
Jim McBride, yeah. I mean, we should tell the audience who Jim McBride is. I mean, he directed the remake of Breathless with Richard Gere.
That's right.
The Big Easy with Dennis Quaid and Ellen Barkin. No small potatoes here, Jim McBride, of course. Anyway, but yeah, just to paraphrase. But anyway, I'm sorry.
He started with a movie called David Holtzman's Diary, which was a kind of somewhat extemporized movie that he put together with the ideas with Kit Carson.
Yes, a mutual friend of ours.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, well, Kit seemed to know everybody. I don't know how he did it.
Knows everybody he knew everybody in the universe, pretty much. It seemed like.
That's right. He was extraordinary for a quiet fellow.
Mm-hmm. Definitely is.
But anyway, when I came to New York, then McBride said, "Well, there's this film production course at NYU in the summertime. They make several short films, and they sort of flip a coin and see who works with whom." And I went there, and that's where I met Scorsese and Thelma Schoonmaker, who has been his longtime editor.
Wow.
And McBride wasn't there at that time. He had been there. There are lots of people that came out of NYU because there was very few film schools that were serious. Most of the film departments in the country just showed films and taught film history. But they had a guy at NYU, a professor who inspired people. And everybody got to work, direct, act in, all of those things in short films, student films. And we each got to do them. I was there for 2 years. And that's where I had met Michael Wadley. And I went to school at Kenyon College in Ohio, and he went to Ohio State. And our wives were friends and dancers with Paul Newman. Oh, Paul Newman, wow. Paul Taylor.
Oh, I was like, what? Paul Newman?
Paul Newman danced. No, he didn't. Paul Newman, actually, I worked with it. He was quite clumsy. No, but anyway, Michael and I became friends.
Michael Wadley, who directed Woodstock, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. 1970 documentary.
But we worked on. I knew him from Ohio, and then he happened to go to for whatever reason, he ended up at NYU Film School also for that summer, and all that little bunch of people got to be friends. And when that period was over, Michael and I worked on a couple short films together. I think one of mine and one of his. And there was a guy that directed big-time, expensive commercials. He was a very classy dude, a Japanese-American guy who was very artistic, and we admired him. And he would come down and talk to us about film, and he had been a cinematographer. And we talked to him and said, how the hell do you get in the film business? I mean, now it's even harder, but in those days, we didn't know, and you had to be in it. It was very unionized in New York. So we said, how do you get in the film business? And he said, start your own company. Well, everybody knows that now, but then we didn't. And then we said, start our own company. He said, yeah, nobody will figure that you don't know what the hell you're doing if you have your own company. So we did that, called Paradigm Films. And then around that company, a bunch of people just collected. What happened was Michael had gotten into photography and very quickly got to be sort of a master of 16 millimeter handheld camera. And there weren't very many good cameramen who did that at that time. The union guys would not pick up a camera and put it on their shoulder unless you paid them time and a half. Right. And so all of the guys who were our age, which was 20-something, got an opening. The 16 millimeter revolution, wireless cameras, self-powered cameras and wireless tape recorders were new the way that digital became new in your generation.
That was the age of Arriflexes and Eclairs coming in and all that?
That's right. Well, a few of us got Eclairs. Eclairs were the first silent camera that was any good. And the Arriflex made a lot of noise. And we got kind of technical. I didn't want to do sound. I had no interest in it. But when we had to get together, we formed a 2-man documentary team. And, we went to France and got an Eclair, and went to Germany and got an editing machine, a chem editing machine, which then became popular.
Oh, yeah, that was high tech back then, though, Ken. That was a flatbed machine, right?
That was. Yeah, a guy told us about it. We went to Germany and came back with all the bells and whistles. We had 3 picture heads and all that stuff.
Oh, was that when Francis had bought all that stuff for Zoetrope at the same time, or? That
was after us. I mean, ours was the first one, and then eventually I'm going to take credit for that. And then eventually,
hell yeah,
there was another one. At this age, I must say I dropped names. I can't remember the name of the other machine that had already proliferated pretty much, and it was pretty good.
It was a Steinbeck, I think, wasn't it?
Steinbeck, that's right.
Steinbeck? I may be saying it wrong. Yeah, Steinbeck.
Yeah, and there was a guy in New York who said, "Hey, I've been to Germany, and they got a better machine over there," and that's how we got ours. And then, sometimes we showed people stuff we were working on, and they would come to our we had rented an office space, an old dentist's office, which was perfect because there were all of these little rooms, which had been dentists, and then they became editing rooms instead. Perfect. Anyway,
turned into editing bays. That's nice.
That's right. And we did not pull teeth, but at any rate, people got familiar with that machine, and it slowly became popular. And it influenced things like those multiple heads, where we screened, when we shot something, different cameras and all, we could screen the different cameras at one time. And that was really what happened with the multiple cameras on Woodstock a few years later. Michael was used to looking at.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
okay, I have to ask, is that what preceded the split screen kind of thing later
right.
in post
That's
on Woodstock?
That's correct.
Wow, that was inspired by the Steenbeck viewers, the three, because you could do 2 or 3 at one, or Chem viewers, yeah.
Yeah, you could look at 2 or 3 cameras and 1 or 2 soundtrack, 1 soundtrack.
Yeah.
2 soundtracks wouldn't make any sense.
For kids out there, you had to lay the tracks and the picture all out on this flatbed deal, literally lay it out and then look at it.
Yeah, reels of film without an actual reel. You put them on a plate. You put them down on a plate.
Physical.
And it was all physical. You had to cut the print, blah, 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 and tape it and all that, use a splicer. And some people got very good and very fast at it. So it wasn't as primitive. It was primitive, but and the advantage of it was, unlike today, when anybody who has anything to do with the film, the hierarchy of the film, can walk into the editing room and say, let's try something different. Well, in those days, you couldn't do that because it was too much work.
Yeah.
Now, now editors are forever saying, oh, my God. And then this vice president from Warner Brothers comes in and has me recut the whole ending just so he can look at it. That's why editors are so tired all the time.
Yeah.
How did that lead to Woodstock? Or was there another big film that
well, no,
Woodstock?
Let me go through a progression. I mean, what happened was, first of all, Michael and I were successful because I went to the best sound guy in New York who worked for NBC, I think, and did those big, expensive documentaries that they used to do that were much more formal than people's work today. And he told me just a few things about recording live sound. And the fact is that even today, most people out in the field don't get really terrific sound. I mean, some do and some don't, unless they have lavaliers on them people. But Michael got he had a real instinct for a handheld camera, and he was the first cameraman. There were a couple of them, but there were a few guys who were good at it. But most of the camera work was very shaky in the beginning, and the people at the network were very conservative, and they go, I'm not putting that footage on there. Well, Michael could cover something very well, and still he was had a lot of endurance, and so he could keep a steady flow with his camera and still pan over here and zoom in a little bit and move around. And it was all very smooth. And what happened was we got hooked up through somebody who ended up being one of the producers of Woodstock. And also Thelma Schoonmaker started to hire us because she worked as an editor, but she worked for a little company, and that guy started hiring us. And so what happened was we quickly got a lot of practice, which is that kind of work really just takes a little mileage.
Right.
And so we got good at working together, and I got familiar with the way that he covered things, and so I could always find a place to get a mic in close, because that's the whole point about live recording is a close-up microphone, a good microphone, and nothing in the background. You cannot point the microphone at that guy when there's a motorcycle behind him, which is what you see today with people using their phones and all that. So we got very good, and we got popular. Public television had a pretty good budget, and they had all these journalists who were not filmmakers, but they were very high caliber people. I could give you examples, but they were journalists, and they were all kind of do good, liberal, let's do, it was the 60s. And so, and we were young and somewhat fearless. And so we were willing to go up to Harlem where a lot of guys were kind of shy about going into that part of town and all that. And we did that. We went down south. We went to film the hippies in Haight-Ashbury because public television had about, I don't know how many, they had a bunch of these producers, and one of them would call and say, you guys want to go to, Alabama or someplace. And it just was continuous. So we were making a living. We were also, after every job, we got to keep all kinds of extra film. So we always had a refrigerator full of film. And guys like Scorsese and McBride particularly would want to go use that film.
Oh, you mean you had ends of film, the ends as they called them?
Yeah, we had, or extra cans. Yeah, film ends, yeah.
Film ends for those kids out there, because film was not cheap to shoot on, kids, by the way.
Yeah.
That's why ends were important in the old days.
They were 400 feet of film on a reel, and that was about 10 minutes or 9.5 minutes. So you always ended up with 2 minutes of film that you didn't use, and then you just took that back out of the camera magazine and put it back in a can and put it in the refrigerator.
Yeah, right.
Which preserved it.
There's a story that John Milius told in an interview about Francis Coppola saving ends from Finian's Rainbow and talking about, like, look at all these ends I've saved. Film is power.
Well, that's the spirit of it, you know?
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest costs.
It's like everybody learns how to do, you know, whatever milieu you're in. Today's milieu is very different, of course.
I don't care. I'm going to say this is going to be controversial. I'm going to say this. Chris Nolan said in an interview that film is less expensive to shoot on. I don't know what he's talking about, or if he ever had to pay for it out of his own pocket. I'm just saying, film is not cheap, kids.
No. I don't know where that comes from.
It's like a cash register clicking every time that motor on the camera is going. It's like
Anyway, we had this thing going, and we had this little company. And if we needed somebody goes, oh, I know a guy that can do, you know, set up lights, or a gaffer or an editor or whatever. And Thelma Schoonmaker, who was already a good editor, just naturally became a kind of consistent editor. When we shot Marty Scorsese's first film. Out of all this, we began to work in not only the stuff that we did for public television, a lot of which we didn't even edit. We just shot footage, miles and miles of footage, you know, and then we'd come back to New York and we'd go somewhere else and shoot another thing.
you'd work on other people's stuff basically as well, like kind of thing.
Yeah, well, we didn't really work on other people's fiction films, no.
Yeah. But I mean, your friend's stuff, obviously. It
was, you know, like I did sound on stuff, but I also put the crews together and all that and kind of kept order. And Michael did the cinematography.
Yeah.
And, you know, like the professor at NYU raised $35,000 for Marty to make his first film called Who's That Knocking with Harvey Keitel.
Yeah.
He was about 21 and right out of the Army or something, Marine. All those young guys. And we were able to shoot that, and the whole film cost $35,000. And we had the editing equipment. I mean, we had other editing equipment, all that. So we had editing equipment. And Marty had asthma and was very, very anxious and nervous. He was always brilliant about film. But at any rate, Thelma was the coolest person ever in the world. And so she said, John, can I bring a sofa in here, you know, and in this editing room? And I said, sure. So why? She said, Marty, I got to calm Marty down. So she'd go, Marty, go lie down on the sofa and let me rough out this sequence, you know, because he was quiet and nice and all of that. He really was.
Yeah.
But man, was he ambitious? I mean, he wasn't obnoxious about it, but he was so serious.
I guess that causes an amount of anxiousness. You know, he's basically very anxious.
Well, you know, he had asthma, and when he got worked up, he had to use an inhaler and all that. So she'd say, Marty, calm down, and blah, blah, blah. And so they made a perfect team, and they still are.
Marty and Thelma Schoonmaker. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they've done such great work together. I mean, I don't like Marty's violence, but I'm kind of against that. But I mean, he's everybody acknowledges he's one of the very great.
He's one of the greats. Scorsese.
No, I agree. She's a great editor too.
Oh man, she can make things work. She and Michael and several other people, but I mean, they made Woodstock. That footage it's hard to take that much footage. They had, you know, five cameras on stage and 4 to 5 camera teams walking around filming, and they sorted all that out, made a coherent film.
Yeah.
We did all this other work, and that went on for a while. And then we made a film I'm very proud of that was put in 2 years ago. Got into the Smithsonian Institute. I forget what it's called. It's something about Black history. It honors the Black history. It has the awkward title nowadays of No Vietnamese Ever Called Me. And that was an expression that Muhammad Ali made. And it was on a poster, and so I edited that. Michael and I had some money, and we had a guy that we taught. We also taught a course after we got out of NYU. The production courses were terrible there, so we taught a production course and met a bunch of people. And there was this middle-aged student, and he came to us and said he wanted to do a film about these black guys who were back from Vietnam and were dissenters in the Vietnam War. I was very political, Michael less so. I didn't do a lot, but I mean, I was passionately involved in the anti-war movement. And this guy was a real lefty, an old-fashioned leftist, kind of not a communist, but damn close to it. And he didn't know anything about film really, but he was very aggressive. He had been a union organizer, so he could get stuff together. So he talked us into shooting this film. We got a couple other teams of camera people. And there was Martin Luther King was going to come to New York City and speak outside of the UN.
Oh, wow.
And there was a march to go to see him. They had an anti-war march, the first big march in New York or anywhere that I ever heard of. And it got like 400,000 people marched on the UN. And one contingent, this has to do with our film, one contingent was there was somebody wanted to start a march in Harlem and have black people come down there to see Martin. That is to march from 125th Street in Harlem, and so this guy David Weiss said, "Why don't you guys help us? Put together a team and film this thing." And so we did, and we did that street filming that we were all good at. We got a couple other teams of people, or he did.
So you obviously know how to film too out of all this. I mean, that's the interesting thing. You could do everything probably at this point, huh?
Yeah, well, when you're in those little companies, that's the advantage, and it's still true. I mean, I know young people that do this now. When you're in those little companies, you got to learn everything.
Yeah.
You got to
absolutely.
You got to. In those days, you had to sync up the film. You had to transfer the sound from a 1/4-inch tape to a 16 millimeter and sync it up with the picture and all this stuff. So we knew all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And on different films, we did different jobs. But for instance, we went to Harlem, and Stokely Carmichael and all those notorious guys who led that movement, or partly led that movement, formed a phalanx of people, and they walked down whatever the main street is, I've forgotten. And as they went by, all these other people joined them, the residents of Harlem. And so what we did, we would reference this big sign they had in front, these signs they were carrying, one of which was "No Vietnamese," or called me. This is an anti-war march. And so we would reference that with a camera, walk over and point the camera at somebody standing on the crowded street, sidewalk. And I would say, for instance, I'd say, "What do you think of the Vietnam War?" And man, we got the most eloquent, because the black guys had died disproportionate to their numbers in society because they got kind of stuck in the infantry up front. And out of that, then we had all this footage and didn't know what to do. And then David got these 3 guys who had just got back from the war, and we went up to Harlem and a little meeting place, and Michael and I filmed them while he questioned these 3 guys about their Vietnam experience. And we intercut that street footage with these guys saying, "Well, when I was in Vietnam, this is what happened, and that's what happened." And we had all this, and then I wanted to make a film out of it. So we had... So I rented another office, but editing, blah, 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 and edited this film with David standing behind me, and edited this film, and it ended up being very popular and going to all the film festivals and all that stuff. And then my wife, Jeannie, was distributing, and so she distributed that film and got it to corporations and all kinds of people. And it's and it became one of the black action films that the colleges all played. So that was a big experience, but we had those kinds of unexpected things develop, all because people knew each other, and they said, "Hey, here's a good idea." And there's a lot of other examples of that sort.
You really captured history there. It's pretty amazing.
How did all this, if I may skip ahead, how did this, you worked on Marjoe later on as a sound man. Is that all you did on Marjoe, or did you do more on that?
Yeah, well, what happened? I ended up sleeping with one of the directors, but other than that, no. What happened?
That's another podcast.
Let's see, Marjoe. Well, what happened? What happened was we kept doing this kind of work that I'm describing, right? Including McBride's film and all that stuff.
David Holzman's diary,
Yeah, and then somebody came along with this idea about Woodstock, and we didn't really know what it was. Michael had filmed Aretha Franklin, and we had filmed Aretha Franklin and some other stuff. We also worked for this TV show called Merv Griffin's TV show, and used to film movie stars and all that stuff for him. And we did a multiple camera version of one of these musicals. That was also why we had various images in Woodstock, is that they filmed Aretha with a couple of 2 or 3 cameras, and the footage was so good, and Merv only used a couple minutes of it, and then we ended up with all that film. And so at some point, Michael said, I'm going to show, because we looked at 3 images on the cam, he said, let's get a bunch of projectors and synchronous projectors and run all the images at the same time of Aretha singing whatever she was singing. And we had made a screening room, and where we made one of the walls a screen, the whole wall. And then we invited people from New York that we knew, other filmmakers and whoever we could think of, and say, hey, you want to see? And they would come in this little room, and this little screening room, and watch this film. Well, one of the things that happened is that the Maisel brothers were another documentary team who were very good, and they were supposed to film at this musical that was coming up called Woodstock. But they didn't get along with the guys who were putting it together. They only wanted to film the documentary side, I think. And so the guys that were organizing this festival, which we didn't really understand that it would ever be anything like it became, they didn't get the job, and they came over to anyway. It's a lot of stories I can't get into, but one of our guys who was a sound man and a friend of ours who worked with us very closely had punched one of the guys, and they got in a fight. I mean, we were that age, and
wow.
So they left in a huff and never came back to the whole idea of Woodstock. Michael had wanted to make a musical film. He wanted to do black music because of the influence of Aretha.
Hell yeah.
But he had this footage to show people. Well, some of the people that were involved with putting together Woodstock came over and went, holy shit, this is good stuff. Why don't you shoot this festival we have? So we still didn't know that it was a big deal, that it would be a big deal. And so
Woodstock, yeah.
Yeah, and so Michael came to me and said, well, we can get the money. There's a lot of details I'll skip, but Warner Brothers says they'll put up the money, maybe. There was a guy in the music business who talked them into that. And he said to me, do I want to produce Woodstock with him? Like he would be the director and we would both be the producers. But he and I fell apart at that point over some other issue. And I said, no, I want to quit. I really never wanted to be a sound man to begin with. I'd like to write and become a filmmaker on my own. And so I went out to Montauk with my family, and I sat out there and was writing. I wrote a collection of poems, and I got a phone call from him and said, "This thing Woodstock, I don't know, it's turning into something, and I can't get up there." This was a couple of weeks, a little more than a week before the festival, and he said, "I need somebody up there. Will you please go up there?" So I went up there and became what they called the location manager, which kind of a joke because you couldn't manage the location at Woodstock, but
yeah.
Wow.
The idea was go up there and then tell the guys who were, because they were negotiating a deal and blah, blah, blah. And they were calling all the people like us around the country who they knew to be good camera people and sound people, documentary people, etc. And they were assembling this crew. They had to get 60 people in about 2 weeks. And so they were doing that, and they said, just go up there and tell us what we need up there and order it and do, So I was that guy on location.
Oh, man. A location manager on Woodstock is unimaginable. Because like a location manager normally just they just have to call the people that own the property when you're going to shoot there. Let them know hey, can we come there? Does it cost a fee to be there? Right. And I mean, that's just unimaginable. I can only imagine what a nightmare that would have been for you.
Well, you should have been there the day there was a camera guy, Mike, whatever his name, the guys who put the festival together hired a guy from England who had been a fashion photographer. He was a very hip dude, but he had turned hippie. But he was he shot very good film. And he had a sound man with him, and they were covering while they were building the stage and doing all the preliminary. Before we got there, they were up there filming just to have a record of what was going on until they got the film thing together. So I'm up there with this guy, Michael, and I'm looking out at all of this, and this horde of people starts coming in. It's like, holy hell. And I turned to Michael, and I said, and Michael smoked a little bit of dope. And I turned to Michael and said, he goes, what's wrong with you, man? I said, well, I'm kind of freaking out here. I mean, there's no water. I mean, what are you going to do with all these people? And then the people just pushed the fences down while we're standing there.
Wow.
And came in like an invading army, literally. And not with an attitude of violence, of course, but just overwhelming enthusiasm. And they weren't going to tickets, all that was beyond all that. And so he looked at me. I'll never forget this. He looked at me and he said, hey, John, can you do anything about this? I said, no. He said, then fucking forget it, dude. And he took another hit on his joint. And I went, you got a point there.
Well, at least he made you feel laid back. I mean, as the location manager, on Woodstock.
Wow.
I mean, that's what I'm saying too. Not just because that's a crowd of people crowding a space, a big space.
You got to go with the flow.
But they did need somebody up there to walk around and figure out and tell them what was going on and where, to give them the nature of it, because they were all just going to suddenly show up, a helicopter, however they could get on site with their equipment. And that's a whole nother story. The logistics of that were done by a guy named Dale Bell, who's still around.
Wow.
And they had to film in from Rochester, New York, from Eastman Kodak, and food. He had a helicopter full of things like steaks,
Wow.
for the crew. Because we all slept. Some of us slept out in the open, but we slept under. We couldn't get back to the motel that we rented, so we slept under the film truck, which was a semi-trailer.
Oh man.
I mean, wonderful things happened. Like I got a guy came up to me and said, "Hey man, they're breaking into they're going to steal your camera equipment." So I go over and I grabbed this guy who was on the crew, who was a really tough fella. He was a mountain climbing expert and just a real sturdy fella. And I said, "Come on over here." And it was Abby Hoffman and his radical leftist guys. And Abby was a colorful guy, and he was very bold. And Abby wanted to be important, and so I rush over with this guy to the trailer, and Abby's buddies got this big 250 millimeter lens, which is worth several $1,000s, and he's going to steal it.
Wow.
So I stopped him and I said, "Hey, I confronted him and said, 'You're not going to take that out of here.' And we're getting ready to fight, I'm ready to stop him if I can." And Abby stepped between us, put his finger in my face and said, "Hey man, you gonna be the first fella to throw a punch at Woodstock." So that was the kind of experience. Yeah, there were so many little things that happened in that place. But anyway, and then I loaded.
That's right, because nobody really got hurt at Woodstock, right? I mean, that's what they all say to this day.
No, that was the philosophy. I mean, that whole thing of John Lennon kind of peace and all that.
Yeah.
That philosophy really was the handle. The hippies were into like peace and love, and all of that came out of our resistance to the Vietnam War. Everybody in their 20s and teens hated the Vietnam War, including people like the Beatles and all those rock and rollers.
Yeah.
And that philosophy became hugely important to that generation. That generation deteriorated later on with drugs and stuff. But at that time, that was like a religion, peace. And so however that got transmitted to that entire crowd of people, they all had the same mindset. Like, we are not going to, I didn't see anybody quarrel. I mean, I was all over that. I was all over that site all the time. And I didn't see anybody quarrel.
I mean, that's fascinating compared to later crowd concerts that happened, like Lollapalooza,
the later Woodstock,
or even the later Woodstock. Yeah, exactly, Anthony. Yeah, right.
Well, you know what happened when the who was it, the festival in San Francisco that followed that turned
Altamont.
Yeah, Altamont turned bad, and you know why? Because we had a little security at Woodstock, but what it was a guy. A very hip police chief, and he had a few guys come up there. They were his detectives and stuff, and they were dressed in plain clothes, and nobody knew that they were even there. Mm-hmm. And all they did was they were there to go up to certain people if they needed advice and stuff. But at Altamont, the guys from England came over, and the manager for the Stones thought it was hip to hire the Hells Angels.
Crazy.
Bad idea.
I say it like walking. Crazy. No.
That's exactly right. And it's 190 degrees different from peace and love. You get the Hells Angels from Oakland. So anyway, that was
like the end of the 60s, kind of.
Right. And so after that film was over, they had to do the whole editing deal. And I was still in New York doing other things. And then Marjoe, I got a call, and somebody said these two people wanted to make Marjoe. They told me the story. Ed Lynch was one of the cameramen, and I had been working with him as a sound guy doing some same kind of stuff that Michael and I were doing, but less of it. And he called me and said, "There's this project, blah, blah, blah." He described it, and I helped him. And so we grabbed a few guys. I particularly grabbed a few guys who had worked on Woodstock and made them the crew on Marjoe, because the two people that were making Marjoe were not filmmakers yet. One guy was a radio journalist who was into interviewing Howard Smith, into interviewing hipsters and rock and rollers and all that stuff. And then he had a girlfriend who was a very smart person and was a bit of a writer, but hadn't made a film. And so we brought this little crew like we did. We would come into places and say, what do you want us to film? And that's what Marjoe was. And that turned out to be a big experience. And that was one of the influence, that experience on that film was part of the influence that eventually ended up in UFOria.
Yeah.
Because Marjoe had a crooked preacher who became the Harry Dean Stanton character.
Yes. We noticed this connection too. We were talking about this so in depth, Anthony and I, after we were watching it again recently for the show.
Yeah.
And we were like, there's gotta be a connection there. There's a connection there. Literally we were saying to ourselves,
well, yeah.
You know.
Especially the scene where Harry Dean's counting the money that he got. It's like...
Well, that was right out of Marjoe.
I mean, we're fans of both movies, so we've watched both movies multiple times. So,
well, Marjoe turned out to be very significant. But let me tell you a little bit about the evolution of UFOria because of these connections. What happened was I had a meeting scheduled with a director here in LA. I was living at the beach and I had a little apartment back when you could afford to live at the beach. I had a little apartment in Malibu and I read the paper one morning. I had a meeting scheduled to pitch something to this director the next day, and I didn't have a story for him. And so I read the paper that morning and I read about these two people who called themselves him and her, and they were going to take people to outer space when a spaceship came.
Oh, wow.
I made a note to myself. Her name was Bonnie Lou Nettles, and his name was Marshall Applewhite. And they collected a bunch of people and made them into a cult and convinced them that they were all that a spaceship was going to come by and pick them up. This is all true. This was in the LA Times.
It's Heaven's Gate.
It was going to pick them up and take them to somewhere in outer space, right? And so I read that article in the paper, and I didn't think. I just thought that's a weird story. Then I went out, as I used to do, as I used to be a swimmer. I went out in the ocean and went for my morning swim, and I'm out there, and then I'm floating around a little bit, and I went, wait a minute, that might make a film. And so that was one step. The second thing that came to me after that one, so I went back to the house, to my apartment, and I started thinking about it with my typewriter and stuff. And I thought, the only thing is, I can make fun of this subject, but the spaceship has to show up. This was before Spielberg's, Heaven's Gate, or whatever it's called.
Close Encounters, yeah.
Close Encounters.
Wow.
Heaven's Gate was the name of that cult.
Yeah. Very famously, they all committed suicide.
That's right. And so Close Encounters had not been done yet. And so this was the first somewhat serious movie, if you call it that, but a realistic movie, that where the spaceship wasn't going to be a joke, right? And that was a nice way to end the thing, I thought. So I had those two thoughts. But then Jeannie, as I said, with my close friend then, had taken me to what they called a psychic fair here in Los Angeles. And every nut in Los Angeles who believed in spaceships and mystical dancing and meditation, standing on your head and all that stuff. And it was like a wonderful little fair of eccentric people. And in my mind, the people that I saw there wearing tinfoil hats in some cases and doing all kinds of shit, they kind of became the people that followed Arlene in my movie.
And there's that great scene. They actually do go to a fair, and then Fred Ward, I love it. He's like, and whatever the line is, he's like, and your fake Swami over here, and you just cut over to that Swami guy. It's a perfect joke.
Well, that anyway. So that was the other. They were like, is the reason it's not just to be amusing, but one of the things is kind of the way a film can come together. Because the third thing was that somebody had to be a cynic, right? Well, the two people with the spaceship idea, they were both serious con men. I mean, I presume they were both, neither of them was a sincere human being. But I thought, well, my other thought that came to me was one of the two people has to be serious. And so that became Arlene, where she wasn't hustling anybody. And the other person has to be cynical or just playing along. And that became Fred Ward.
Yeah.
So you have these dynamics. And on Marjoe, you pointed it out, there was a crooked preacher who, by the way, that same preacher, after Marjoe was finished and came out, about a year later, one of the directors called me and said, you know that preacher? Well, he's in prison now because what he did after we made Marjoe, he went on to do what he did. And one of the things he did, he got arrested for selling stolen cars to his followers, to the people who would
Oh,
come to his.
wow.
Yep, he would auction off cars that he got from guys who stole
Oh.
them, and he got busted, and he went to prison. So all that stuff, you know.
UFOria is sounding more and more like a documentary as you mentioned it.
Well, it was in a way. It was an amalgam.
Yeah, Jordan and I are from Dallas originally. I think you filmed some of that in Fort Worth, right? Was that the guy from Fort Worth?
No, we didn't actually go there.
Oh.
So, we only went up to, we located up in Palmdale, up in the mountains up here. Jeannie was a part of the film crew, and she got all those locations.
Mm-hmm.
I thought were perfect, the bar and all those things. And so anyway, what happened was that, so I went to the guy, this is a Hollywood thing, I went to the director the next day and I pitched this idea to him. I said, I got an idea, and I told him what, very in brief, what my inspiration was, and without much detail. But while I'm telling him the story, there's two young women. This is so Hollywood, I couldn't believe it. There were two young women diving in and out of his swimming pool. We're sitting over near the pool, and they're naked, right? They're like 20 years old. And I'm thinking, if this isn't Hollywood, I'm sitting here pitching a story to a film director, and there's two beautiful naked girls diving in and out of the pool. And it was not a total loss. He didn't like the idea, but it was a nice experience for me. At any rate, that's the way that story went. And then what happened was I went home and I wrote it up. I wrote it up as a partial script and then an outline to the end. And somehow that got out to some people, and a producer encouraged me to finish it. Again, this is a Hollywood sequence. So I get rejected by one. The story is rejected by one guy. I put the story together, not a finished script, but pretty good. And I show it to another producer, and she says, hey, I want you to finish that script. I can get it together, because it was already enough writing. She had confidence in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that. I got a contract with them. And then I found out through somebody who was associated with them that they were going to hustle me. They were going to I said, I'll only do it with you if you let me direct. And okay. I was confident I could direct, even though I hadn't had a feature direction credit.
And you're getting to write as well, which is more in line with what you want to do. That's amazing.
Well, it was. And she was very encouraging. But then what happened is her boss was a typical Hollywood hustler, and who made a few films. But what happened was somebody came to me and said, hey, that guy's going to get rid of you, And I said, oh, yeah? He said, yeah, there's another guy who had just had a successful film. I forget his name. And they want him to direct. So I don't know how they're going to do it, but they're going to get rid of you and keep your script. And they think they can do that.
Oh,
this is a guy with real money and everything. This is not the only time that happened, but I'll tell you. So what happened was I went, son of a bitch. And so I went home. And I spent hours reading this contract, because when you get a contract in Hollywood, it's often an amalgam contract that has been put together from history. In other words, it's a boilerplate from other contracts. Mm-hmm. And they're put together in a sloppy fashion sometimes. And if they made them simpler, they'd be more ironclad. But this was a big, thick, stupid contract. And I spent hours reading it, and I found a kind of a grammatical error that made a sentence the backwards of what they meant it to be, and it allowed me to give them a 30-day notice and walk out with the script.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. So I took it to my lawyer, and he said, I can't believe you found this. I said, yeah, I'm not a lawyer. So I took it out. So I got the film back, and then Jeannie liked the script, and she got it to a woman who got it to the company that eventually, there was another woman there who read their script, and they liked the script. And then I can't remember who, but somebody got it to Cindy Williams. And Cindy was a big deal at that time.
Yeah, Laverne and Shirley. She was in a big TV show for everyone. Laverne and Shirley, big in the 70s.
Yeah, that show was a big show, right? I mean, it went on forever and all that. And I was a little suspicious because it was such a playful show, and I wanted my actors to be serious and not let the comedy come from other elements. But Cindy and I had dinner at a place in Hollywood, and she came in and she was Arlene. I mean, she was wonderful. As actors will do that. They come in and they are in the character.
I liked her accent, by the way.
Yeah, she was so earnest in that role, and I do like the fact that she's in the story. You really respect her. You're not really poking fun. That's part of the movie is you don't know whether she's accurate, and she doubts herself, and
you laugh at her, but she means well. She means well. She's got a good heart.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, she got it, and I must say I will take some credit for the thing. Not that she wouldn't have done that on her own, but don't make fun of these characters. Let them be funny.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
and that was kind of. I think I knew that from the beginning instinctually, and she got that completely. I don't even know if we ever talked about it. She came into that dinner. We sat down, and I ate. She didn't, and she was Arlene, and she was so sweet and moving, and she knew what she was doing. I mean, she was a very experienced actress. And so that was it, because for a small film like that, budget at that time was probably $5 million, right? When you get Cindy Williams, you got a movie, right?
Oh, yeah. It's made.
Oh, totally.
If you don't mind me rambling on like this, there's some funny things that happened.
No, not at all.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So after that,
ramble on.
Thank you. So after that, she calls me and she said, "Do you know this actor Harrison Ford?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I saw him in that movie, whatever that spaceship was."
Harrison Ford never went anywhere after being a carpenter and a stoner. Never went anywhere.
No, he didn't, a poor guy. But I'll tell you what happened was I had gone to another director's house one time, and I used the bathroom, and it was all beautiful. The whole room was wooden lined, and I said, "Man, this is incredible work. This woodwork in here is amazing. Everything was all this wonderful exotic wood." He said, "Yeah, there's a guy. His name is Harrison Ford, and he has a place over here, and he's a great carpenter."
Wow.
So anyway, but the point is,
you said Cindy Williams introduced you to Harrison Ford. Is that what?
Yeah. So I think Cindy might have had a crush on him, but I'm not sure.
Who doesn't? I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, even I do.
Same here. I'll admit
it. There you go. But I'll tell you, here's my faux pas. Well, I don't think it was a faux pas. I think I was right. But so she goes, "Okay, well, look, somebody at Sony Pictures will call you, and they're going to screen. What was the future? What was the film he was in? Anyway, they're going to screen.
Oh, Blade Runner.
No, the other one before that. I'm sorry. This is when you're 80s.
Apocalypse Now.
When you're 80s.
American Graffiti.
The one after that.
Oh, Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Oh, Star Wars.
Star Wars. I had seen Star
that little
Wars,
movie, Star Wars.
Listen, it's embarrassing.
Independent film.
I forget names. Like, who's that guy? It'll be Marlon Brando. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good.
So Star Wars. So she said, "Well, anyway." So I go over to the studio and they screen a movie for me, and I go back and I call her and she goes, "Well, what do you think? Isn't he great?" I said, "I don't think he can act."
Oh no!
So what do you mean?
Oh,
yeah, I did. I honestly did. So she said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And she was crushed. I said, "Well, it's not that he can't act, but I don't take him seriously. I think he's campy. His acting in that movie was campy, and I want a guy who's dead serious." And that's that was my point about the characters have to be played seriously. Well, I didn't know that he could have done that too, but this was that's the reaction I had. He wasn't yet the hero.
But this is not the same Harrison Ford, mind you. This is not the same from nowadays.
From later on.
This is
not yet.
Yeah, this is like This is 1977 before.
That's right.
And there's an old saying in Hollywood: if you can't get Harrison Ford, get Fred Ward. That's how it goes.
Well, you have to first turn down. You have to first turn down Sam Elliott.
What?
So I turned him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, he would have been good, but anyway.
I could picture that. He would have been like,
"Wow,
yeah,
would have been interesting."
Come on, Arlene. Wow. Did the aliens at Taylor, Arlene?
You're absolutely right. He would have been fine. I mean, you get what I mean about Harrison, but he would have been fine.
Totally.
But for some reason, I didn't buy it. He came out to my house and we had a couple. He was very disappointed. At any rate, you got to do when you're a director. You got to do that.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask: were you afraid that he would have been like? Remember, he did the only redneck Harrison Ford I can think of is Bob Falfa in American Graffiti. Were you afraid he'd just be Bob Falfa again all over? Maybe also.
I don't know. I had the feeling that I don't know why. I felt both those guys would put quotes around the character.
Right.
Yeah.
And might be
go with your gut.
And I didn't think it should be cute, and I'm like that.
I mean, your instinct was right, though. Don't get me wrong. Fred Ward was the right choice.
Fred Ward, I think that's true too.
I love Fred Ward. I miss Fred Ward now. Even I didn't even know him. I miss him. You know.
Well, you would have liked him. I mean,
rest in peace.
He was a hell of a guy.
Rest
I
in
mean,
peace.
he was so modest.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a couple of things about him. But what happened was they set up an space for us, and I'm in my office, and we had a couple of really good casting directors involved. And the guy called me and said, I forget what he said. He said, he sent Fred to me. And I'm sitting at my desk, and the door is opposite the other side of the room, and the door opens, and this guy walks in. It's Fred. And he comes in. He's got on, of course, he's got Levi's on and fur boots and a flannel shirt. And he walks over. And by the time he gets there, I damn near hired him in my head. Because Fred could be so serious. I don't know. I just loved the combination of spirit that he had, where he was so serious. It was almost funny, but it wasn't. I mean, it was a great guy.
Yeah.
So he comes in and we have
he could do comedy real well.
Yeah, and he knew he was a very smart guy. I mean, he was very sophisticated under all that redneck kind of, not redneck, but a macho kind of exterior. He had been a lumberjack and a boxer and a martial artist, and I mean, he had himself beaten up a lot and in his life. So he was a tough guy, and so after a little bit of conversation, I hired him. I just thought he was great. And Cindy used to work nervous. And she would get emotional, and I didn't know how to handle that very well because when you first film, you're very serious, and I wasn't. I didn't know what you're supposed to do if you're a director, if you're not fighting with somebody, is put your arm around them, and just kind of calm, be a father figure. And I didn't do that. I sort of felt like I had a thing in Hollywood about it. I don't care if you're a star, you can't give me a lot of shit, And so I would stand up to people, and so she was messing up one day. Was kind of becoming neurotic one day on the set. She had been great.
Yeah.
But she was interrupting the filming with her nervousness, anxiety, and I misinterpreted it, and I was extremely rude to her. But once we got past that moment, she was wonderful. On the other hand, no matter what was happening, even that situation that day, Fred never stirred. He would just sit down and be quiet. And one day I said, Fred, how in the hell can you be so calm? No matter what's going on, nothing ever phases you. He said, well, I'll tell you, I went to Rome a couple of years ago. I studied Commedia dell'arte and I studied Zen Buddhism. And he said, well, they had me sit on a pillow all day long. I said, what do you mean? He said, for 8 hours, I would sit on a pillow. And I did that for about 6 months. And he said, when you've done that, nothing. Now, he may have been exaggerating, but nothing bothers you. And that was the answer. I haven't ever done it.
Did he say it like Sheldon Bart when he was telling you that at the same time?
No, he was just very polite.
Yeah.
No, he was very polite and very nice and very responsible. And when other people were agitated. We had a pretty easy shoot. I mean, we all got along pretty well. I want to tell you about Harry, but he's a little complicated.
Oh, Harry Dean?
Wow. But Fred never changed. I mean, he didn't put on any airs. He didn't pull any. Cindy was really rude to him because of the Harrison Ford thing. She wanted Harrison Ford.
Really?
There was yeah.
You can only say so much to the director. If you don't walk out, you're kind of subject to the director's attitude. So she didn't take it out on me. But she was kind of rude to Fred, That was the only thing. When she wasn't like that, she was wonderful. And I don't want to talk behind her back now that she's gone. Generally, once I raised my voice to her, she and I told her, I said, this is unacceptable. You can't act like this in front of everybody. And that was it. She didn't. She was very decent. And very responsible, and man, she could work. All these people were really professional. I want to tell you about Harry, though. Harry was wonderful.
Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite actors of all time, to be honest. Him and Warren Oates. Yeah, those are some of my two. Yeah.
I heard from a friend of Kit's, Hunter, that I know. I mean, I heard from a friend of his that like Harry Dean liked to drink the whiskey even till he was like, old, because he puked in this guy's car at some point during film festival.
Hey,
of course, I was like, Harry Dean puked in your car, dude. That's awesome. Consider that an honor.
Oh, I never washed that car, boy.
Well, Harry would call me at night, and I mean 11, 12 o'clock at night, and he would ramble on, and he was obviously very stoned.
What? Little weed, little Kentucky whiskey.
And he was fascinating to talk to, but not necessarily when you have to get up the next morning and get a film together. And he would go on. And what was really driving him was that he finally got around to saying it. He thought he tried to convince me that he should have Fred's part.
Oh, wow.
And he should be Sheldon. And, what do you do? I mean, you don't want to insult a guy. And I honestly, like you said, I believe it was Anthony, I thought he was one of the great actors. And I didn't want to insult the guy, but he wasn't my leading man that I had in mind. So we finally, he surrendered, and we went to work. And the film, a couple of funny things happened that I want to get into. In fact, let me tell you real quick what happened. When the film was going to be made and the company had the money, and that company, Mel Simon, was a very, very rich man, and he could always get money whether anybody cared or not. And he was a simple guy from the Midwest. He was a brilliant businessman, but at any rate, they were going to do the movie. Once they had Cindy, they knew they had a movie, and they were thrilled, and there wasn't any problem. But they had a deal with another producer who they owed something to, and I don't know what it was. And he said he wanted to meet with me. This is before we were shooting, and he wanted to meet with me. So we had the usual brunch, at the Polo Lounge with 5 famous faces right around your table. And he and I were talking, and he said, "I've got a great idea." And I said, "What?" He said, I went to the rodeo the other night, and it was wonderful. I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "It was a gay rodeo." I said, "Pardon me?" He said, it was a gay rodeo. And he said, I think that is a fabulous idea. I said, "What?" And he said, "Sheldon should be gay."
What? Really?
And so I had the same reaction you're having. He said, "Sheldon should be gay, and I think that would be such a great idea." And he was apparently serious. He himself was obviously gay, and nothing wrong with the guy that I knew, but I mean, and he was successous.
I mean, as much as we'd love to see Sheldon gay, it's just
a different,
I don't know.
Different story.
I didn't even have time to think about the phone call to Fred Warren. Say, "By the way, Fred, I forgot to tell you."
Wow.
So of course I said no. And
what do you mean Sheldon's gay? What are you talking about? I can just picture Fred. That's my bad Fred Ward impression. Sorry.
I didn't get too excited. I just said not a chance. And so somehow we ended that breakfast. But there was a wonderful guy named Bob Relier who was the production supervisor. He's the guy that knew about production and everything else that worked for Mel Simon's company. And the other people, some of them were very good, but he was the one who held everything together, and nothing rattled him. He had been a partner of Steve McQueen's and knew how to handle him, and that wasn't easy. And all that stuff.
God,
yeah, he was a real sophisticated guy and a real straight shooter and strong man and all that. So anything went wrong, he just made it happen, made it okay. And so the film, other than that, and one dolly grip who I had to fire because it took too many drugs, nothing else went wrong in that film that I can think of. And Bob helped make it smooth. But one of the things that happened with Harry was, to me, amazing. But we had a scene, there's a scene in the movie where Harry and Fred are shooting pool in a bar.
Oh, yeah.
And Fred's telling him a story about Marlene wants to go to outer space, and he thinks it's crazy, and Harry comments on that. And Harry's really good, but what happened was we started shooting, and Harry kept stopping, and I'd say, "What's wrong?" He'd say, "Well, that guy, there was a guy rolling off camera." Making a long dialogue scene while you shoot pool is a little difficult because you have to time this, when you're going to shoot it, when you're going to stop, when you're going to talk, and all of that, obviously. And so we were trying to do that, and he kept interrupting it and stopping. And I go, "What in the hell is the problem, Harry?" And he goes, well, and he started to blame the guys on the crew. And I was, I must have been a little bit stressed. And in the middle of this whole thing, and Harry wanted it this different. He wanted the lighting different. And he did all. So I went along with it, but I got a little pissed off. And we're in a bar, and I said, "Give me a beer." Somebody handed me a beer out of the cooler. This is not a very admirable thing for a director to do. So I drank that beer and maybe another, I don't know. But at any rate, I get to near the end of that beer, and Harry is still stumbling around and bullshitting. And one of the guys on the crew came over and said, confidentially, he said, "Harry will do this." I said, "What?" He said, "I've been on other films with Harry. And, he stays up at night and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Yeah, I know that." He said, "Well, he doesn't always know his lines." And so he's doing all this.
I wondered that. If
well,
that was getting to that part.
You should have been there because I didn't get it, And so by the time you do 25 tries, he knows what the scene is, because he had obviously never really read it. And so
like Brando or something.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's right.
I only had I had the director commentary from Escape from New York, where John Carpenter asked Kurt Russell why actors want to change the dialogue, and Kurt Russell said, "You want to know why? I'll tell you why. Because they don't know their lines." And that's the only reason why, because I had a little reference for that, but that's why I was lucky I had a reference for that. You did not have that reference. I mean, obviously, how are you going to know that, though, being on a movie?
No, it didn't occur to me. And I'll tell you, when you're dead serious in the middle of being responsible for, it's understandable that you blow up.
When you're making a comedy, still it gets serious, folks.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a comedy to me, but it turned out that way. Anyway, so at a certain point, I said, "Fuck you, Harry," and I took the beer bottle in my hand and I threw it.
Oh, no way!
No, I know. I'm not proud of this, but I love the anecdote.
No, you got to hold your own, I guess.
I threw it in his direction, and I threw it pretty close to his head. I didn't try to hit him. I mean, I'm not that stupid. But I was going to goddamn stop this, and so I did. So I threw the bottle.
You want to throw down, Harry Dean? Let's go.
So that's right. So it smashed against the wall behind him, and freaked him out. Freaked out everybody in the room, and it was like, "Oh my God, John, what did you do?" Well, I used to be kind of a pool shooter myself, so I threw this thing, and I was like, "Oh man, that probably wasn't the best thing to do, right?" So he stormed out, and I don't blame him.
Yeah.
And he goes over to Cindy's trailer and goes inside, and apparently there was a guy, good friend of mine on the film called Richard Baskin, who's a music guy. He did the music.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And he did the music on Nashville, and he's a great guy.
Oh wow, Altman, yeah.
Oh hell yeah. Yeah.
And he's a confident fella, and so he goes over, and he's a very diplomatic guy, and he goes over, and then after a while, he sends somebody back and says, "Tell John to come over here." Well, he went in there and calmed them down. So I went into the trailer, and they were both going to quit the movie. They were going, and they could have, and I'd have been sued. And oh my God!
Yeah, wow,
wow, really?
You don't do any of that,
Yeah.
I mean, I was still the guy in the pool room.
Although you were making this movie around 1980, right?
This was 1979,
1979.
Oh,
it's excusable in 1979, especially.
Yeah.
You ain't kidding, man.
You could get away with that now, for
There's
sure.
a lot of things I did in 1970s. Anyway, so he came back, and he was perfect after that. And he was not only that, but once in a while he would come up with the best line imaginable. And everybody was cool after that. And I don't think we had any troubles whatsoever. I think we weren't happy with the ending or something, and we maybe reshot that. But it was a great experience. And then nobody distributed it for 5 years.
Yeah. What was? I'm sorry, Anthony. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I want to get to that, but I thought that Fred Ward, and Harry Dean Stanton had really good chemistry, and the same. I'm surprised to hear that Cindy Williams and Fred Ward had issues a little bit there, because the chemistry between all these folks really shows.
That she got over that. I don't know if somebody talked to her, but.
Did she fall in love with Fred Ward? Is that what it was?
No.
I mean, as we all do.
Well, I think I don't know, but somebody suggested she really liked Harrison Ford as a person, and I think she might have, liked him as a potential girlfriend. I don't know. They were on that film together, American Graffiti, and I don't know anything about it. And she wanted me to direct a film later on, and I didn't like
They
it.
auditioned on Star Wars together too, as we've seen the auditions.
Well, I guess they were buddies, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously they went way back to American Graffiti.
And I don't blame her for being mad at me. I mean, who wouldn't be? I mean, she knew more about Harrison Ford than I did. I just would walk out of the screening and went, I don't want that guy. You know.
Well, you wrote the script. I mean, I think you made the right choice, and I think history shows. But
well, you know, in Star Wars, he played a cute character, and I just was not with my head with that. And also with that kind of material, I was certain that I wasn't going to make fun of my own material. As comedic as it might be, I wasn't going to make fun of it, and I didn't. And I was strict about that with the actors. I mean, I didn't have a problem. Well, everybody got it. You know, when your first days of shooting go in a certain way and everybody gets it and there's no problems, everybody gets it. They know what the tone is.
Yeah.
And once that tone's established, the actors are amazing that way. You know, how they can, I love acting. And not always personally, but I love what actors do. Everybody does.
Yeah. Right. Harry Dean and Fred Ward had great chemistry as well, I think. Those two.
They did, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. Totally.
Like sitting outside that trailer.
I love the way they're drinking beer together. Yeah. I mean, it makes me want to drink beer with them.
You just want to hang out with those guys. You know what I mean?
I don't even agree with Harry Dean Stanton's character, of course, but I still want to drink beer with them and Fred Ward at the same time. That's the weird thing.
I loved them that night. That night I really wanted to have a beer with those guys, too.
Yeah. He's like, come on in, Sheldon. Sit down. Have a beer.
I think that was Harry's line when he said, everybody got to believe in something. I believe I'll have another drink. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah. That's because that's the line for the movie right there.
Yeah, I mean, that is the line for the movie. And I think he might have made that up. It's been so long ago, I don't remember. But I think that was Harry. But he had a couple of lines where they were like perfect.
Wow.
He was a real actor. I mean, in the sense of he fell into more than most.
But your gut instinct with Fred Ward was obviously right. Did Fred Ward come in with the Waylon Jennings thing, or was that your idea?
No, that was mine. I was a Waylon Jennings fan. I had a dog.
Oh, hell yeah.
I had a dog named after Waylon Jennings.
Oh, great.
No, I tell you what, when I knew Kit in New York or wherever I met him, I don't remember, but when he came out here, I mean, he stayed at my house, my apartment and all that.
Kit's from Dallas, Texas.
I had to kick him off my sofa one time. But at any rate, he stayed with me, and when I got rid of him, he went over to Jeannie's house. Anyway, he used to hang out with her too, and he had a brother. They all had nicknames, those Texas guys. And he had a brother named Goat.
That I didn't know, actually, about Kit.
Yeah, he had two brothers. One of them was named Goat, and the other I can't. Or no, he had a brother and a friend, and they each had these funny names.
Yeah,
Kit was because he was distantly related to Kit Carson.
Yeah, he brought that up in a lecture I saw him. I did with him,
and he was an incredibly interesting fellow in many ways.
Yeah, but he turned you on to Waylon Jennings.
Well, no, he turned me on to people from Texas. I was already, I mean, part of when it came out of that soundtrack and that movie and all was, I was a fan of that kind of music. I knew Willie Nelson and Chris Christopherson and all those guys. And I don't know, before or after. And then Kit got me, there was a guy named Jim Meeker. He's a rich guy from Texas. He's the guy that buried those Cadillacs out on his ranch, Cadillac Ranch. You ever seen that?
Outside Amarillo. I've seen that.
Yeah. Well, he had a lot of money, and he was always showing up places.
Anthony and I are both from Texas, by the way, John. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Dallas.
Say
Texas,
what?
We're both Texas natives, by the way, Anthony and I.
Well.
We're both from Dallas. I was born in San Angelo. Anthony, were you born in Dallas?
I was born in Dallas. Yeah, we're both Reformed Texans here. We don't live there now.
Oh, my God. Well, it means I like you, and you make me nervous.
Yeah.
Those Texas, that's a whole nother chapter in my life. But I was into that music deeply, and I used to go over to a bar in the valley, and one of those guys would play, and the other four guys would show up. It might be Willie, or it might be Chris, or it might be any of them.
Wow. Yeah, they just show up. Wow.
Yeah, it was I can't remember the name of it. It was a great place to.
He did Houston, the Legend of Texas later on it, right?
Yeah. Another guy was a historian, brought me that material, and he kind of guided me through that material. And we spent some time. I went down. He took me on the trail the whole revolution. Said, well, here's what happened here, and he was a great guy, very earnest, studious guy, and he stood at my shoulder while I sat at the typewriter, and tell me stuff.
I was watching the VHS of that one recently.
So how did so we're just curious about what happened with Euphoria. Were there how did the release of that go? I know that's quite a story right there.
I never really knew the truth of that. What happened was we screened it when it was finished, and the guy who ran the company got in the elevator with me and didn't say a word. And I had a funny attitude about people. That's sort of a cowboy attitude, And he never told me. I figured, well, I'll figure out what's up. So I didn't know why he was so silent. We had been a week late in delivering the film to 20th Century Fox, had a distribution deal with this company. They hadn't made a good movie at that company yet. This was the first one, and this was too good for that company. I mean, they were not sophisticated. And the guy at 20th Century Fox, for some reason, rejected it. I never could find out why. I had the most powerful agent in Los Angeles at the time, and he quit just as my movie was finished. So I didn't have a powerful, you have to have some power when you get at the level of making actual Hollywood films. If you don't have a heavy duty backup, somebody's going to screw you,
Yeah.
That is
this was
sure.
not advantage of me, but I never did find out what the rationale was. I know that Fox just didn't like it, and when they realized that we were 7 days or 8 days late on the delivery, they could technically get out of their deal. So I heard about.
Was that during the Alan Ladd time of Fox, or like post or pre still?
I'm not. I don't think he. I don't know if he was.
Or is it just so many board of directors at that point?
Well, there was one guy who was the head of the distribution there.
Oh.
And he was a mentor, some kind of he had some power over the guy that ran the company that owned Euphoria. And that guy went along with his opinion, and they never fought it. And I didn't have a real potent representative at that time, and I should have hired a big time lawyer and gotten into all that.
Yeah.
But I didn't worry about it, so I didn't. And it sort of floated around, right? And then I got word that Universal was interested, and Universal just went and bought the damn film. And so Universal had the film, and they gave it to a distribution specialist. There are these guys who are individuals who, when you have a film that they don't know how to market it. For the Hollywood guys who didn't make movies like that, I mean, they didn't know what to make of that film. I mean, they have their form. It's just like today. If you don't have an exciting film full of, the dead girl in the beginning and 32 murders, they don't know what the hell to do with it.
We need those trailer moments, John, don't we?
Yeah, that's right. And so
I'm just joking.
The special, no, it's true. Well, anyway, don't get me started on that. But the specialist, who was a smart guy, showed the film because it had these hicks, as characters. He took the film to Peoria, Illinois, showed it in a shopping center at 5 o'clock, the end of the shopping day.
That's not hick enough for me. I'm sorry.
And, and they didn't get it, maybe because they felt made fun of.
Yeah.
And they didn't get it. And they gave him, how they hand out pieces of paper after those screenings, say, did you like this and did you like that?
Oh, the preview screenings.
And the people did the preview screening, but it was previewed they didn't, I asked them to take it to New York and show it to critics and stuff, because I said, you don't get it. This is a sophisticated film.
It's not a middle America film. This is
not a middle America film.
It's not for the hit crowd. Yeah, exactly. Just because it has hicks doesn't mean it's for the hit crowd.
That's right. But what happens is when somebody makes a decision like that, this is true at all levels in Hollywood. They don't, for instance, I've had scripts where a studio hired me to bought a script of mine and then gave it back to me or whatever. They own it, and I asked for it back because they're not going to make it. And this has literally happened to me more than once.
Yeah.
And so I go, this other studio will make the movie. May I have it back? We'll pay you whatever you want, But they don't want to give away a film in case the other studio has success with it.
Yeah.
So that whole word, we buried the film.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's the weird superstition in Hollywood, right there.
Yeah, they do that a lot.
And it's pretty common. That's one of the rules. If there were 12 rules, that would be one of them.
I think there's still things in Hollywood today that exist on that level. Like, I think there's still superstitions in Hollywood today, even despite all the multimedia ways of releasing things like streaming and to the theater and all that.
Well, they don't want to be the guy who turned down something that turns out to be successful elsewhere.
I think they still work on that level, I imagine, too, honestly.
I think they do. So anyway, what happened was, so I begged these guys. I said, look, I know the kind of people that will like this film, sophisticated people. Take it to New York. Let me show you. So Universal bought the film, did this screening, and then they decided they were going to drop it and bury it. Later on, of course, years later, the guy apologized to me. But at any rate, they wouldn't show it to anybody, and they locked it up. And it was locked up for 5 years. I couldn't get anybody to see it. And so finally, there was a guy in town, name escapes me now, shamefully, who got them to give him a print of it to show at the film festival in Los Angeles. There was one at that
and this
time.
This is 84 at this point, maybe?
It's about 84, yeah.
Ish.
And it was really a very popular. And a guy named Kevin, a writer for the LA Times, Kevin Thomas, really liked it, wrote a rave review. And then other critics wanted to see it. And then I still couldn't get them to let me take it anywhere else, So Universal had made Blade Runner, and they had and Sidney Sheinberg, who was the most powerful guy in Hollywood.
Oh, at Universal, yeah.
Yeah, at Universal. He ended up being Spielberg's mentor or partner.
Yeah, he made Spielberg pretty much. Yeah,
that's right. He was his backup, his big time boss, or whatever you call it, father figure. And so he was a big time guy, and everybody was afraid of him. But I was angry, and he messed around with that movie, and wanted the ending changed, and they went through a big war about it. And the press picked it up, and they began to pick on Sheinberg for interfering with a really good, what turned out to be a really good work of art, Blade Runner. I thought it was really good, and so did everybody else.
Right.
And so I called up Sheinberg, and he said, well, this isn't any of my business. I'm the boss over here. I said, that's why I'm calling you. I was really ready to fight. I was ready to, he's the kind of guy who could probably have you shot. But I was going to
ready to throw down, as we say in Texas.
Yeah, that's right. That's what you guys would have done. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, I just got a phone call from one of the networks, and they want me to go on their movie, gossip show, and they want me to tell them why my film has been victimized. When a couple of critics have seen it and say it's a good film, now I'm going to make you look like a real asshole. I promise.
Yeah. Wow.
And he got really silent, because people didn't talk to him like that.
Yeah.
Even getting him on the phone wasn't,
He's not just a human. He's beyond that, man.
He was. I mean, he was a big deal. And so he went quiet. He said, well, let me see what I can do. He really didn't want he had gotten a lot of bad press, and he didn't need it, Yeah. So, and the film didn't mean anything to him. So what happened was he allowed other people to show the movie at festivals and stuff, but he wouldn't put up a nickel. So he gave them a poster, literally gave a poster to them. It went to Chicago and New York, and the critics to festivals. And the critics there, Roger Ebert in Chicago and the big critic at the New York Times, they loved the film, and they started talking it up, and then people wanted to see it all over the place, but Universal wouldn't distribute it. The other thing that I never knew until a few years ago is that the guy who did the music rights screwed them up. He became an important guy out in Hollywood, but he somehow didn't get the rights properly, and they wouldn't pay to use this. I mean, somehow they blamed the not releasing the film on that. I don't believe that. But it was some
because you couldn't get the Waylon Jennings song. I've always been crazy. Like or the rights to it at least.
So I don't something like that. But they could have gotten it, and or I could have gotten it. By calling certain people I knew, because I had worked on Willie's film. And
Honeysuckle Rose.
Honeysuckle Rose.
Honeysuckle Rose. Yeah. And, I was the third writer on that. I just fixed up that script. Anyway, I might have written the third version. The third version, that's the way it is in Hollywood.
That's the way Kit used to talk about a script if I asked him about it. I'd be like, hey, you did Chainsaw Massacre 2, Kit? He's like, yeah, I was one of... everybody wrote that movie.
Well, Honeysuckle Rose, just for the moment, what happened was they had pretty good writers, but there was one writer and made it very morose. It made it a very sad story, and another writer who took it in another direction and made it too sweet. Yeah. And I was known for writing fast, and so they called me, and I came in and did a third version with Sidney Pollack was a producer, and he worked with me. I mean, guided me to what he wanted, and so that was just the third version. But at any rate, the Euphoria finally got around, and then there was the revival houses that used to be art houses that were now called revival houses. Were bringing back old films, and those people were always looking for a film that they could play to a pretty sophisticated audience. So that became popular. It played around, and then they began to put it on cable channels. So that was the end of it, and it never got distributed.
I think where I saw it was on cable and video later on. Yeah. Was, I think first on cable.
Well, now there's a real bad copy on YouTube.
Oh, yep.
In fact, I keep thinking I should get them a better copy. So
it's from the VHS, I can tell. Yeah. Do you own a print of your movie?
Well, Universal gave me a few copies of a very good disc that they took off of their printing material.
Shut up! No way! Jump back! Oh my God! I'm nerding out.
I tell you, I got angry and bitter about all this stuff, and so I didn't fight the battles I should have fought.
Well, you did the best you could. But it's a great movie. You made a great movie.
Hey, we're talking about it today, so it endured, I think.
Yeah, I told somebody the other day, I said, maybe when you have a movie like this, in a funny way, it lasts longer, unless you write a real classic.
Yeah.
Because I still get, there's still people online writing reviews of it. So anyway, that's pretty much
Did you get if you don't mind me asking one more question, but did you do a lot of script doctoring work after Euphoria from all your writing?
Yeah, I did different things. I got at some point I was so disgusted in the middle of not being able to get Euphoria out. I actually made a pledge to myself.
I can understand that.
I'm going to do what they asked me to do. And so I became a kind of a hack, where they would call me up and say, will you write this story?
Yeah.
And I would do that. And I did a lot of that. And then I also did, I wrote some TV movies that were successful. And then I wrote a couple of Westerns called The Black Fox. It was a trilogy. I wrote, I think, 2 of them. And that led to a series with Bob Urich was in called The Lazarus Man.
I watched that when I was younger. Yeah, I loved that show.
Yeah.
Back in 96 when that came on. And I actually it came on late at night at my time of the night. And so I loved it.
Well, it was a nice show. What happened was they had a guy who had written the pilot, and he was, for some reason, wasn't up to running the whole show, all that work that you do in the room. And I had written these Westerns for the producer of that show, who was now producing on that show. So he called me, and I came in there and took over as head writer. And I wrote some scripts, and I directed 3 of them, I guess. And that was fun. That was a fun show. We didn't have much money, so we didn't have to do a lot of crazy action and all. I was able to write these little stories that were sort of human level, and it was quite popular. And then Bob Urich, just to piss me off, got cancer.
Oh God!
And
bless his heart.
No, but he was a good, hard-working actor. I liked.
Oh yeah,
I loved him on Lonesome Dove. I mean, he was great in your other movie, Endangered Species, even that you wrote.
I rewrote the second Lonesome Dove. It's called Return to Lonesome.
Oh, really?
Dove.
You wrote that?
No shit? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't write the original.
No, he said he rewrote the sequel, Return to Lonesome Dove, which I just came across that.
It's not bad. It's not. That first one was the classic.
Yeah. How do you top that?
Everything is good about it.
Yeah.
But I got a phone call because I knew how to do Westerns, and I just went to work on it. And all I did, I didn't even stick around for the filming. I was doing something else. And I didn't get along. I hated John Boyd. He's such an asshole.
Oh, that's right. He was on that. Was Val Kilmer on that one too? No, that was a different. I'm sorry, that was a different Lonesome Dove.
Yeah, well, the young fella, I forget his name, but anyway, but that was, my son was working with me on Lazarus Man, and he came with me, and we went up to somewhere in Idaho and sat in a hotel room and rewrote that script.
Oh wow!
And then I had a fight with what's his name, and I was afraid we were going to have a fist fight, so I left. But that worked. It was just. I did a lot of those kind of jobs.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I was too proud to do what you got to do in Hollywood, which is, for instance, the guy who was the most successful of all the people that I knew was Scorsese, and Scorsese never looked back. He was never nasty to people.
Yeah.
He was always eager. He always went right. I was with him one night. He was editing something that I had directed, some commercials actually for the circus, I believe.
Yeah.
And he was my editor back when we had that little company, right?
Yeah.
And I had taken a few camera guys down and shot in the winter quarters, and then we had to turn these into commercials. It was a silly job, but we did it. And Marty was the editor, and we're editing one night, And I mean, he was impatient with that kind of stuff because it didn't interest him. But he was a good editor, and he was editing. And he said, "Hey, let's quit and go. I got to go down to the actor's studio. There's an actor down there. Somebody told me he's pretty damn good, and I want to see it. You want to see him?" So we get up. We go down to the actor's studio, wherever it was, 43rd Street or someplace. So we go down there and we go in, and the actor's in this brief underwear, no other clothes on, acting his ass off, being very fascinating. And it was De Niro.
Oh,
It
wow.
was young De Niro.
Baby
And
De
he was
Niro.
yeah, he was, but he, I forget why he was undressed, but it wasn't obscene. It was just that he played the thing in his briefs, and he did the damnedest things. In the middle of a speech, he'd lie down on the floor and stretch his arms. And,
Was it the new theater thing? Was it the thing that I heard about?
This was,
the Living Theater, where they would actually get undressed. Is that what it was?
No, it wasn't part of that. It was just Shelley Winters had written a short play.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
Shelley Winters was, an actress, and she'd written a short play, and De Niro was the guy. And
She got him naked. Wow.
and I don't know what that was about. And then we went
Probably
across,
just wanted to see him naked. I don't know.
Then we
Shelley
went.
Winters.
That's probably true. Then we went across the street to Joe Allen's, Marty and I and Bob and Shelley. And Shelley was a bigger talker than I am. And Shelley regaled us with Hollywood stories.
I bet. Wow.
And Bob didn't say a goddamn word. And every now and then one of us would say, well, Bob, what do you think? Well, I don't know. It was so, and that was the whole thing. Joe Allen's was a bar where every show business people hung out. But at any rate, that was my Bob De Niro story.
Yeah, that tracks. Yeah, we talked about Wild in the Streets not too long ago with Shelley Winters, and she just seems like
But
character.
what I meant about Marty was, and why he was one of the many reasons he was successful. When anything came up that might have been good for him, like somebody said, "Hey, there's a very special actor down there," he got up and went out the door, to go see the guy. And he was like that about everything. If he couldn't figure something out, he'd get somebody who could figure it out.
So he was Marty Scorsese sounds like he was more in tune with some things, because like the thing about Scorsese, he stayed true to his convictions, I guess.
Oh my God.
On everything.
Absolutely. Well, he had that milieu, living in Mulberry Street in Little Italy. He had a world to work with. Mm-hmm. He had, he really, just as he still is, was an absolute saw every movie in the world because he was unhealthy as a child and he loved to go to the theater and sit there all day and look at movies.
Yeah.
And he never got over any of that, and he never had any other interests that I knew of. I mean, he was very pleasant. People liked him.
Anthony and I were just talking about Gone in 60 Seconds having a hot-wired feeling to the movie, if you know what I mean. And that's the way Scorsese's movies were, too, especially in the beginning as well. But every now and then you still see glimpses of that in his movies, like you hot-wired a car,
That's a big point. I mean, people like that, they know what movies are.
Yeah.
And in some essential.
He understands them on a gut level, definitely. He understands cinema on a gut level.
There you go. There you go.
But you do too with Euphoria. I'm sorry, I will say
Euphoria, I was about to say.
We're praising you like Italian critics here. Yes, bravo, John Binder. Yes.
Yeah, I don't have time now. There's some Marty stories too.
God, we'd love to hear them. Did you, I was watching Last Waltz again recently, coincidentally around the time Robbie Robertson just passed. Did you pass any around that? Like
Jeannie, my wife Jeannie ran that show.
No way.
Wow.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, what happened? She didn't get the right credit because the union insisted on giving it to a guy who didn't work on the movie.
Oh, that chauvinist crap.
Jeannie had worked with Neil for a long time.
Oh, Neil Young?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Jeannie and another guy who started with us at Paradigm Films, Larry Johnson, who was my protege when we hired him when he was 19 in New York. And Larry and Jeannie were boyfriend and girlfriend for quite a while, way back when. And then he continued to work with Neil. And what happened was after Woodstock, Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young wanted to make a film. And so Larry came to the rest of us and said, hey, these guys want to make a film. And so Jeannie and Larry and I and some other people, David Myers, who was a great cameraman on Woodstock, shot a lot of the good stuff on Woodstock. We filmed those guys down at Fillmore East and all that rock and roll shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
That began a relationship, and then Jeannie went on the road with them. Jeannie and Larry went on the road with them and kind of ran the situation while they would do a concert and they would film it. That film never got done as such, but they shot a lot of footage. Mm-hmm. And Larry and Jeannie knew their way around. and all of that kind of stuff happened. And somehow that whole circle of people all knew each other. And when, I don't know how it started, but when Last Waltz came along, Neil was part of that.
Yeah.
And they needed somebody to run, be the kind of the production expert, and that was Jeannie. Yeah. And so she kind of does whatever job is necessary. And she, when Neil went on the road with Rust Never Sleeps, Jeannie took that show on the road. I mean, she ran that tour.
Wow.
She had never done that, but she knew how to get people going. And when you have 10 dope smoking rock and roll, you need somebody to pull it. And Neil's a very hard worker.
Oh, yeah. What is it about it? I'm going to say women are just the best thing. They're best at organizing when you always have the best female editors, film editors as well.
I agree.
What is it about? Women just have it in their gut instinct sometimes, their DNA somehow about organizing things and being married to a woman as well, just like. Yeah.
The best film editors that I've ever heard of were all
right. I mean, especially in the 70s. I'm going to I give credit to them. I'm going to say it. Marcia Lucas, and Thelma Schumacher and Jaws.
Well, Jaws. I forget her name, but she made that pulled that movie together. Jaws wasn't working, and they turned it over to her, and she made it work. Not to say the material wasn't there; it was.
Verna Fields.
Verna Fields. Thank you. I was gonna.
Verna Fields. She did a number of films, but she was pulled it. Thelma's like that. You could give her the worst footage, and she'd do something with it.
Spielberg came up with the word for Verna Fields, mother cutter, and that's the way all these women are as editors, mother cutters. Yeah. Even Tarantino had a woman editor for the longest time.
That's right.
She did Paper Moon, too. Paper Moon was fantastic. American Graffiti.
That's very interesting you brought that up, because now that you say it, a lot of the great editors were women.
Even the woman that edited Lawrence of Arabia was a woman.
They had to really bite their lip, though, to be around the male world.
Of course they did. That's the sad part.
The thing about Jeannie is she just ignores all that. You can't bother her. She could be in the midst of all those guys who wouldn't tolerate many women. And she doesn't contest with them. She doesn't fight with them. She just does it. She goes, well, I got to go do that job. And she would do it, and it all worked out. I mean,
that's a woman with her own balls of steel right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know any other way to describe it as a male idiot. So
yeah. All right, Mr. Binder. We greatly appreciate your time. This is amazing.
We greatly appreciate it, man. This has been fantastic. The stories and
well, thank you.
I tell you what, and for everyone, John has would you call it an autobiography or a collection of stories?
Yeah.
Who Needs Heaven? True Stories. Yeah, you can find that on Amazon.
Well, I have 4 books of poetry on that. It's all Amazon, just under my name. They can go look. John Binder, Amazon.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so check out his poetry. A man of many talents, for sure.
And your wife, your wife wrote a book too, as well, right? I mean,
yeah, she wrote She wrote a book that every young woman who wants to go out in the world should read. And I ain't bullshit. It's wonderful because she's a person that walked in the door all over the place, different things. She got in the film business because people were stuck on a mountain in Aspen and it was a whiteout. She was a great skier. She said, I'll take you down the hill. So she took these people down to safety. And then that guy said, hey, I have a film distribution company in New York. So she went and got in the film business. Why don't you come work for me? And she did that with everybody. She just comes in and goes, hey, you know what you guys need? And then she does.
Do you have the name of the book?
But I'm telling you, that book is very interesting because having worked with Neil and Joni and, Paradigm and Woodstock and all that stuff, she has for a young woman to see how you do it without being obnoxious.
Yeah.
Is a big deal. That's what they tell her when they read. The F word, what is it? Oh, something about the F word is the title. Oh my God. Film, food. She ran a restaurant too, and so film, food.
Oh, here we go. Here it is. F words. My life of film, food, feminism, fun, family, friends, flaws, fabric, and the far out future.
That's the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Gene, you won't believe it. This guy's asked me the title of your book, and I forgot.
We got
it.
F word.
F word. That's her. Anyway, that's her.
Hello, Jeannie.
Hello, Jeannie.
Are you still on with us?
They said hello, Jeannie. Say hello back.
Oh, hi, guys.
Thank you for letting us borrow, John.
It's a good thing it's not video. I just got out of the pool.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Hey.
All right, okay, guys. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you so much.
Man. Thank you.
All trailers, clips, music, or any other copyrighted material are used sparingly, edited from their original forms, and used for the purposes of criticism, discussion, commentary, and education about these fine films.